In 1986, at the end of 1986, I moved here to Pierce, South Dakota, and began the Bureau for Aberdeen covering state government. I've been here since. It's been 30 years, and in that time I've made a number of transitions. In 1998, I went to work for Governor Bill Janklow, and then after 4 years with him, I went back into the newspaper business, and I've been in it since. As part of that transition back into the business, I contracted with 5 daily papers. I've gone back to the Aberdeen American News. We've continued that relationship with the other papers and actually expanded, and I now have 7 papers. 7 of the 11 papers in the state get their state government news through me. So, what I've seen here in the last 30 years is a complete reversal in terms of what newspapers and TV stations cover here at the Capitol. We went from having 10 year-round reporters in the mid-1980s, 2 for the AP, 2 for UPI, 3 daily papers, 2 TV stations, public radio. And it gradually has diminished, and it's gotten to where right now there are 2 of us left. There's an AP reporter whose job is the entire state, and then we have me. I think that is counterproductive, because then what you get is superficial reporting. You don't get depth. You don't. For example, in our legislature, there's 105 members, and every one of those people comes to the Capitol with something they want to accomplish, or many things they want to accomplish, whatever the case might be. And I don't think that on any given day that even a third of the committees get covered during session. And and then in the afternoons, they run dozens of bills, legislative pieces of legislation through. And I don't think that beyond 1 or 2 or 3 that those get covered. And yet they're all laws that people want passed or want to kill, whatever the case might be. And so you'll have tremendous debates on things that just never see a word in print or get a word on broadcast. In terms of where the newspaper industry is at in South Dakota, they're transitioning to an online presence as well, but they're doing it in different ways. The company I work for, which is a privately owned company, they prize local content. They want good newspapers. They provide grants to pursue projects, things like that. Whereas the Argus Leader, which is owned by Gannett, they're trying to just basically put themselves out of business, and they want to go strictly online and not print a product at all anymore. So, we're going opposite ways. And then you have papers that are just slowly dying on the vine, and they'll continue to publish, but I don't know for how long. I don't know where they'll be 20 years from now. The trouble that news organizations have under their, what I would describe as their traditional revenue model, is that it's difficult to get advertising onto the web. You can have maybe 1 ad, 2 ads, but you don't have page after page of ads. And so what happens is there may be an ad or 2 or 3 on the news organization's main front site, if you will, on the web. And then you go to a story and there might be 1 or 2 ads, but they don't have the page after page after page, or minute after minute after minute of time of advertising. So if you're reading a newspaper or listening to a radio or watching a television broadcast, you're getting just that steady stream of advertising throughout. Whereas on the web, it's a very targeted, very narrow advertising. And that narrowness then affects their budgets, and their budgets drive their reporting staffs, and consequently they have fewer reporters. And I'll throw a circulation number out. The Argus Leader in Sioux Falls, which is the state's largest city, which has had tremendous growth. The growth has gone, they've doubled in growth in terms of population in the last decade or so. And at the same time, the newspaper has lost half of its circulation or more within that same decade. So, and the same thing is true in Rapid City, which is the state's second largest city. They've had tremendous growth, and the newspaper circulation is just steadily going down. Circulation is holding steady in some places, such as Aberdeen and in Watertown, Mitchell to some extent, but I just don't see good things coming in those places that are the fastest growing places in South Dakota in terms of how they get their news. I think what you see happening in Sioux Falls and Rapid City is also what you're seeing happening in other states, other cities across the nation. And we've seen a steady decline in the number of newspapers throughout the country. And the Washington Post, the Graham family finally sold the Post a few years ago to the owner of Amazon, and I didn't think that paper would ever get sold. And as a daily reader of it, I see a shift in its tone. It's increasingly analytical as opposed to factual. And so you see much more opinion highlighted, even from its staff, more analysis, and in my opinion, less coverage of the nuts and bolts of the federal government. And so if that's what the newspaper in our nation's capital is doing, I think it just sets the tone for papers throughout the nation, for news organizations throughout the nation. Back in April, when President Trump was nearing his 100-day mark, and there appeared to be this battle within the news media and the White House over whether the 100-day mark counted. And I think Trump succeeded in changing the tone about that, the conversation about whether 100 days mattered. And now he still hasn't really accomplished much, but he at least accomplished a change of tone. And I don't vote. I never have. So I don't have a position on whether he's the right or the wrong or whatever. But so I wrote a column about how Trump changed the conversation based on 100 days, and one of my papers wouldn't run it. And it's a weekly column. I mean, it's a fixture, and one of the papers wouldn't run it, and because they didn't want to give him credit for. They didn't agree with what I was saying about him changing the conversation or attempting to change the conversation. They just thought he's wrong, and that had never happened to me before. It just, where a paper chose to censor me. Maybe the better way to put it is we're becoming misinformed. And Trump's, I won't name the organization, but there's a news outlet that had a lot to do with Trump getting elected. And I use the term news outlet loosely. But on the other hand, that's where people go to find out or to reinforce what they already believe. And I think the value of traditional news organizations was, they may be opinionated somewhat one direction or another, but you got to the middle. And there's no middle anymore, or there's less and less of the middle these days. And I think we see that in our national politics, in the Congress, and in the campaigns for president. And then it gets down to the state level, and you see it in the campaigns for state offices in ways that weren't there before. And I think that where this leads will be pockets of people who just don't get information, or don't get reliable information that they can take to the voting booth or to the council meeting. And so what you'll see are places where they're down to one reporter per radio station. They're down to a handful of reporters at the newspaper. And I think those will continue to get shaved. You'll see radio increasingly go, automatic. And I think you'll gradually see some newspapers become more and more where they rely on AP for copy, but AP is pulling back. And so that, I worry about the future of journalism in that respect. And I worry about what happens to the readers and the listeners as a result of that their decisions will be based increasingly on hearsay and not on reported facts.